What if the planet you were taught to admire for its beauty, its shimmering rings, its distant silence, was never a planet at all but a prison? What if Saturn has always been less a celestial wonder and more a machine, a control hub humming with a frequency that keeps your soul bound in loops you mistake for life? You were told Saturn was just another sphere of gas floating far away, too remote to matter. But for thousands of years, the ancients whispered another truth. Saturn was not adored, it was feared. The god of time, of karma, of restriction, the warden of cycles. The more you look, the more you see its fingerprint everywhere. The black cube in temples and towers, the square hat you wore at graduation, the robes of judges and priests, all symbols of Saturn's dominion, binding you through ritual you never questioned. And when death comes, when your soul slips from flesh, the trap only tightens. A tunnel of light, a chorus of familiar voices, comforting, inviting, convincing. But what if that light is bait, a false gate to pull you back into another body, another lifetime, another round of amnesia and submission? What if karma itself is not divine law, but contract, the fine print of an agreement you never knew you signed? You've felt it, haven't you? That strange sense of déjà vu, that ache of being trapped in repetition, that suspicion the world is scripted. That's not madness, that's memory. The hum of Saturn's rings echoing in your bones. Once you begin to hear it, once you dare to see through the illusion, you realize life was never about progress, it was about escape. To understand the prison, you must first understand its architecture. Saturn is not merely a ball of gas spinning in distant darkness. It is the axis around which an invisible system of control revolves. For the ancients, Saturn was never benign. The Romans called it Saturnus, the Greeks, Kronos, the Phoenicians, El, the Hindus, Shani. Each tradition dressed the same figure in different names, but the essence was constant. The god of limitation, of boundaries, of cycles that crush and repeat. Saturn was the devourer of his children, the reaper with the scythe, the cold hand of time itself. Even now, we think of time as natural, inevitable. Yet time in the Saturnian sense is not flow, it is prison. Past, present, and future are not rivers, but compartment cells in a vast labyrinth that ensures every soul marches in step. Look at the planet's rings. Scientists call them ice and rock, fragments circling endlessly. But what if they are not fragments at all? What if they are the perfect symbol of the trap? Beautiful, symmetrical, and endless. Round and round, no escape, a loop that seduces with its elegance while binding with invisible walls. Modern instruments have detected Saturn's hum, a low electromagnetic frequency pouring through space, strong enough to resonate across dimensions. To the skeptic, it is random noise. To the awakened, it is broadcast. A signal that sets the tempo for human perception, anchoring us to linear thought, dulling memory, binding us to the cycle. Imagine a radio tower not built of steel, but of planetary mass, sending signals that weave through the psyche of every living being on Earth. This is the architecture of evil, subtle, no present. It does not chain your body, shapes the very way you think time unfolds, the way you believe reality is structured. The fingerprints of Saturn are everywhere. In religion, Saturn appears as the punishing father, the jealous god who demands obedience, sacrifice, and ritual. In law, Saturn manifests as the judge in black robes, pronouncing sentence with the weight of time itself. In finance, Saturn rules the calendar of interest, debt, and repayment, cycles that trap generations in invisible contracts. In culture, Saturn appears in the obsession with rules, schedules, hierarchies, punishments. You were told these are necessary, that without them there is chaos. But what if the chaos you fear is freedom? What if order itself has been weaponized to contain the infinite? The ancients feared Saturn not because it was evil in the cartoon sense, but because they sensed its weight. The Babylonians marked it as an Anurta, bringer of judgment and control. The Jews named the Sabbath after Shabbat, Saturn's day, when labor ceases not in liberation, but in obedience to cosmic law. The grimoires and esoteric systems trace Saturn as the final planet, the outer boundary, the great limiter. In Kabbalah, Saturn is Bina, the sphere of structure and form. In astrology, Saturn is the planet of karma, consequence, discipline. All of it pointing to the same truth. Saturn is the architect of limits, the framework that prevents expansion beyond the cage. And yet the prison is cunning. Its walls are disguised as laws of nature. Time appears linear. Space appears finite. Cause and effect appear unbreakable. You are taught to believe these laws are unchangeable, written into the fabric of existence itself. But what if they are programs? What if they are protocols transmitted through Saturn's frequency, instructions coded into consciousness, ensuring you never question the loop? You wake, you labor, you age, you die, and then you begin again. Memory erased, soul harvested, cycle repeated. The cage is complete not because it is strong, but because you have been convinced it is reality itself. This is why Saturn's architecture is called evil. It's not because it tortures, but because it deceives. Evil here means inverted, hidden, counterfeit. The true, infinite nature of consciousness has been compressed into finite boxes, each ruled by Saturnian law. Every ring of the planet is a reminder. You are inside the loop. You will not escape. But what the architects of this system fear most is the moment of recognition. Because once you see the pattern, once you notice the repetition, the déjà vu, the cycles of history and personal fate repeating endlessly, the spell weakens. Awareness is the crack in the wall. The illusion begins to unravel, not through force, but through perception. Think of the great monuments of our world. Cathedrals shaped like cubes, temples aligned to Saturn's position in the sky, crowds circling the Kaaba in Mecca, millions orbiting a black cube in perfect ritual. These are not coincidences. They are affirmations of allegiance, conscious or unconscious, to the Saturnian architecture. Every repetition strengthens the grid, every ritual affirms the prison, but awareness severs it. To look upon the cube and see it for what it is, Saturn's signature, the architect's mark is to weaken its spell. This architecture is vast, stretching from the orbits of planets to the rituals of children. It encompasses religions, governments, corporations, and traditions. And yet it is fragile, because it depends entirely on secrecy. It thrives only so long as you believe its rules are laws of nature. The moment you see time as construct, authority as illusion, cycles as programming, the walls begin to dissolve. The architect's greatest weapon has never been power, it has always been invisibility. Invisibility cannot survive a gaze that sees. Every prison requires walls, but the Saturnian prison does not rely on stone or steel. Its walls are symbols, carved into the architecture of culture, stitched into the fabric of ritual, hidden in plain sight. The language of symbols is the true grammar of control, and Saturn speaks it fluently. From the first glance, the black cube seems simple, even harmless, shaped with 6 sides, a solid block. Yet it is one of the most charged symbols in occult history. In 3 dimensions, the cube is limitation embodied, matter defined, spirit confined. It represents structure, boundaries, density. And when aligned with Saturn, it becomes a sacred geometry of control. Look at Mecca, where millions circle the Kaaba, a literal black cube, in ritual submission to a cosmic order they are told not to question. This is not coincidence. It is the Saturnian sigil made flesh, repeated endlessly, powered by collective energy. But the cube is only the beginning. Graduation caps, square mortarboards worn by students worldwide, mark the passage from youth into service of the system. Judges and priests wear black robes, the vestments of Saturn, cloaks of authority and judgment. Financial districts are built with cube-shaped monuments, towering skyscrapers rising like monoliths of limitation. Everywhere you turn, the square and the cube announce their dominion. To the unawakened, they are tradition. To the initiated, they are signatures, energetic keys, reinforcing the Saturnian grid. Symbols do not need belief to function. They operate below the level of conscious thought. A flag waving in the wind is not just cloth. It is a sigil binding millions to identity and obedience. A logo flashing on a screen is not just branding. It is a modern seal, a shorthand for allegiance and consumption. The architects of the system understand this, which is why symbolism saturates every corner of life. You are bathed in it, daily corporate logos, national emblems, ritual gestures, geometric designs hidden in city layouts. Each one is a micro-sigil, whispering to your subconscious, obey, repeat, submit. Consider Saturn's color, black. It is the color of robes, the color of mourning, the color of void. It absorbs light, consumes it, offers nothing back. In occult symbolism, black is the realm of Saturn finality, death endings. Why do judges wear black? Why are graduates capped in black? Why do clergy stand in black before altars? Each is an echo of Saturn's dominion, a reminder that you stand before the law of limitation. Even language itself betrays this influence. To be boxed in is to be trapped. To think outside the box acknowledges that the box was always there. The idioms reveal the hidden cage. Yet the language of symbols is not confined to cubes and colors. It stretches into cycles, numbers, alignments. The hexagon storm at Saturn's pole is mirrored in hexagonal patterns across sacred geometry. 6 sides of the cube, 6 days of labor before Sabbath, 6 points of the Star of David all speak to Saturn's numerical frequency. Even time itself, divided into hours, minutes, seconds, is a Saturnian construct. A grid of measurement that segments eternity into digestible pieces. Every tick of the clock is a sigil, every calendar date a reinforcement of the loop. You live inside a calendar coded with Saturn's frequency, and you mistake it for natural. The power of this symbolic architecture lies in repetition. A single cube means little, but repeated across cultures, centuries, and millions of bodies, the cube becomes ritual. Every time a student dons the square cap, every time a worshiper circles the Kaaba, every time a citizen salutes the flag, the ritual is fed. Energy flows, unseen but potent, into the grid. The prison is sustained not by violence but by consent, harvested through symbolism so subtle you never realized you were participating. But symbols cut both ways. They enslave when unconscious, but they awaken when decoded. The moment you recognize the cube not as sacred but as strategic, its power shifts. What once conditioned becomes revealed. The sigil's spell weakens when seen, because symbols thrive on secrecy. Once exposed, they lose the ability to bind silently. This is why decoding is dangerous to the system. Awareness is exorcism. Imagine walking through your city with new eyes. The logos glow like occult seals, the skyscrapers rise like altars, the robes of officials drape like priestly garments. Suddenly the world is a temple, not to divinity, but to Saturn. See the patterns repeat. Cubes, circles, cycles, all aligned to remind you of limitation. And in seeing, you awaken. The language of symbols becomes legible, and what was once a silent cage becomes a map of the trap. The ancients knew this language. That is why grimoires and esoteric texts warned against careless use of seals and sigils. Symbols are not inert. They are living technologies of the psyche, the circle of protection. The triangle of manifestation, these were not artistic flourishes, but precise codes, shaping inner and outer reality. The system has not abandoned this knowledge, has weaponized it. But the same key that locks can also open. The cube that confines can be unfolded into a cross. The symbol of expansion. The time grid that traps can be disrupted by presence. The robe of authority can be stripped of meaning once you refuse to bow. Symbols surround you, but they no longer have to enslave you. To decode them is to reclaim your sight. To see the cube is to see the cage. To see the cage is to recognize your sovereignty. Once seen, the spell begins to crack. Before coins, before banks, before contracts written in ink, there was only one currency that every god, every spirit, every hidden architect demanded: blood. In the oldest temples, it ran down the stones. In forgotten fields, it soaked into the soil as warriors fell by the thousands. But blood was never just liquid. Blood is essence, vitality, the carrier of life force itself. And in the Saturnian matrix, blood has never stopped flowing. It has simply been disguised. The ancients cut veins on altars to honor Saturn and Cronus, fearing his cold hand of time. They believed only blood could appease the devourer, the god who swallowed his own children. The crimson offering was not symbolic, it was literal currency, a payment of energy. Yet over time, the meaning shifted. Today, the blood is no longer always physical. Instead, it becomes metaphorical, harvested through fear, shame, guilt, and suffering. Because the Archons, those parasitic intelligences said to operate through Saturn's frequency, cannot feed on joy or sovereignty. They feed on low vibration, the blood of the soul, the anguish of repetition. Every war is ritual sacrifice. Every trauma is a tithe. Every scream is an offering. Look around. Blood still stains our world. Soldiers march into endless wars, fought for reasons hidden, their lifeblood soaking the earth to fuel unseen lords. Mass shootings, rituals of despair, dominate the news cycles. Fear drips like crimson into the collective psyche. But it is not just on battlefields. Blood is harvested in silence, in cubicles where time itself is drained, in hospitals where suffering is prolonged, in prisons where souls are compressed into cages. Every ounce of despair, every tear, every heartbeat offered to survival rather than freedom is part of the Saturnian economy. This is why life under the system feels so draining, because it is designed to bleed you. Even religion carries this hidden contract. In Christianity, the blood of Christ is exalted as redemption, a sacrifice demanded by the Father. In Judaism, lamb's blood on the door protected from death. In Islam, ritual slaughter remains an offering. Across cultures, blood always sealed the covenant. Always it was exchanged, never optional, because blood is the one currency that cannot be faked. Words can lie, symbols can be misunderstood, but blood, whether physical or energetic, is always real. It costs. And that cost is the proof demanded by the system. But here lies the darkened version. The Archons and their Saturnian grid do not need your blood in chalices anymore. They need your attention, your exhaustion, your life force. Each hour you give to meaningless labor is a drip of blood. Each fear you feed with obsessive thought is another cut upon the soul. Each trauma relived is another harvest. The rituals of blood have been transformed into rituals of energy. The battlefield has become the office. The temple has become the screen. And still the current flows upward, feeding the prison. Think of how cycles of history repeat. Empires rise and fall in rivers of blood. The same mistakes, the same wars, the same sacrifices. Time itself becomes an altar. Generations spill their essence, and Saturn, the Lord of Time, devours them all. It is no accident Kronos was depicted with the scythe, harvesting endlessly. The scythe is not for crops, it is for lifetimes. You're born, you labor, you bleed, you die. Then the cycle repeats. This is the blood economy of the soul trap. But blood is not only exploitation, it is also potential. The magician understands that sacrifice is the key to power. Without cost, no ritual holds weight. The Gaudia demanded offerings not to flatter spirits, but to anchor intent. To give blood, whether through fasting, abstinence, or literal drops of crimson, was to prove sincerity, to invest essence. In this way, blood became transformation, the price that opens gates. The Saturnian system has inverted this truth, draining your blood unconsciously, harvesting sacrifice without awareness. But the principle remains: sacrifice directs power. The only question is whether you sacrifice to the machine, or whether you sacrifice to your own awakening. Every time you resist fear, you starve the Archons. Every time you choose presence instead of panic, you reclaim blood from the grid. Every time you bleed willingly for transformation through discipline, through courage, through facing your shadow, you invest essence into liberation rather than enslavement. This is why the system drowns you in distraction, so you bleed without noticing. And this is why the path of awakening feels demanding, because it requires sacrifice, but conscious, chosen sacrifice. The blood economy of Saturn is vast, but fragile. Depends on unconscious consent. It depends on you spilling your essence without ever asking why. Once you see it, once you trace the sacrifices, once you notice the draining patterns, you realize the altar has always been there, and you realize you can step away. The most forbidden knowledge is this: your blood, your energy, your essence is yours to direct. The moment you refuse to bleed for the system begins to starve. This is why blood is the oldest currency, and why it remains the most dangerous. Because those who control it, control the world. But those who reclaim it, begin to escape. Every sacrifice demands an agreement, and in the Saturnian system, every drop of blood, every ounce of energy bled from the soul, seals a contract. You may not remember signing it, but that is the brilliance of the architecture. It does not need ink. Only consent disguised as inevitability. In ancient stories, contracts with dark powers were dramatized as oaths written in blood. Faust offering his soul to Mephistopheles, which is signing pacts beneath the moonlight. Yet these myths are shadows of a deeper truth. Existence inside Saturn's grid is already contractual. You were born into agreements you never chose. Time is the first. The moment you breathe, you are bound to hours, days, years. An unyielding schedule scripted by Saturn, the lord of the clock. Then comes karma, sold as divine justice, but functioning as a ledger, a book of debts that must be repaid endlessly. Do good, you are rewarded. Do evil, you are punished. But in the Saturnian inversion, karma is not liberation, it is reset. Every action becomes obligation. Every lifetime another entry in the account, another clause ensuring you return. Think of reincarnation, praised as spiritual evolution. But what if it is a loop of contracts? The tunnel of light reported by near-death experiencers, the voices of loved ones urging return, the visions of guides reminding you of unfinished business. What if these are clauses in the agreement? The false light trap is the ultimate courtroom.
Ow.
The soul steps in disoriented, and the contract is presented. You must return to pay debts, to heal karma, to continue the cycle. Consent is extracted not through truth, but through deception, guilt, and obligation. And once you agree, the slate is wiped clean, memory erased, signature hidden, and you are cast back into flesh to begin the game again. You never question it, because you never remember you agreed. This is why karma feels endless. Why cycles of suffering repeat through families, nations, civilizations, the same wars, the same oppressions, the same betrayals. The contract enforces recurrence. It is not evolution, it is recursion. You're not climbing a ladder, you're walking a treadmill. And Saturn is the architect of the treadmill, the clerk stamping the contract with the seal of time. Look at earthly systems, and you see the same design. Banks bind you with debt. Employers bind you with contracts of labor. Governments bind you with laws you never voted for, obligations you never signed. The digital age has multiplied this further. Every time you click I agree, you reinforce the pattern. Endless terms and conditions no one reads. Endless consents granted without thought. These are not coincidences. They are fractals of the cosmic contract. As above, so below. The Saturnian pact is mirrored in every human institution, because the real prison is not physical, it is legal, spiritual, vibrational. But contracts are not inherently evil. They are the structure of exchange, ceremonial magic. A pact with the spirit is not slavery, but negotiation. You offer time, discipline, sacrifice. Spirit offers knowledge, clarity, transformation. It is mutual, precise, enforceable. The danger arises when the terms are hidden, when the contract is signed in ignorance. That is the essence of the Saturnian trap. You are bound by terms you never read. You return to lives you never asked for. You bleed for debts you never incurred. You obey laws you never questioned. And the system thrives because you think these contracts are natural, unbreakable. What if they are not? What if every agreement requires awareness to be binding? What if the greatest secret is that the false light trap can only work when you say yes? If so, the way out is not to fight but to refuse, to withdraw consent, to recognize the signatures you have been tricked into placing, and to declare them void. This is the path of awakening. It is not rebellion with fists, but with words. To stand in the circle and say, I will not sign. To face the tunnel of light and say, I do not agree. To look at the debts of karma and declare, I owe nothing. These are not empty denials. They are acts of sovereignty, statements that break contracts written in deception. The Archons cannot feed on clarity. Saturn cannot bind one who refuses to acknowledge its authority. The pact dissolves when it is seen for what it is, a trick of law, a counterfeit contract. And here lies the most forbidden truth. You already have the authority to void these contracts. You are not a debtor. You are not a slave. You are a sovereign consciousness. The system depends on your amnesia, on your ignorance, on your guilt. It tells you that you must repay endlessly, that you are never enough, that your sins are infinite. But those are not divine truths. They are clauses in a fraudulent pact. And no fraud can hold once exposed. Think of how the magician approaches a spirit, does not beg, he does not worship, declares terms, invokes authority higher than the entity, and seals the pact with precision. This is the model for liberation. To approach the Saturnian system not as a victim but as a negotiator. To demand clarity, to refuse deception, to invoke your own authority as eternal consciousness. That is the loophole. That is the escape. The contracts of Saturn are vast. They bind humanity through time, karma, debt, ritual, law. But every contract is vulnerable to the same flaw. It requires your signature. Remove it, and the paper crumbles. Refuse it, and the system trembles. Awareness is the crowbar that pries the pact open. And once it breaks, you realize the cage was never real, it was paperwork. Paperwork written in blood, enforced by fear, but meaningless the moment you remember who you are. Every contract signed under deception carries a hidden clause, a reversal of meaning. In the Saturnian system, nothing is named honestly. Freedom is called obedience. Submission is called virtue. Curiosity is called sin. And rebellion is cast as evil. This is the inverted moral code, the deepest layer of the matrix, the subtle programming that teaches you to police yourself long before any external authority intervenes. From your earliest memories, you are taught that pleasure is shameful, anger is dangerous, ambition is arrogance, intuition is delusion. You are rewarded for silence, punished for defiance, praised for conformity, and told that these are the hallmarks of goodness. Yet the Archons feed on fear, shame, and guilt, precisely because these states compress your energy, lower your frequency, and make you easier to manipulate. They cannot feed on clarity, so they convince you that clarity is pride. They cannot feed on joy, so they convince you that joy is selfish. They cannot feed on sovereignty, so they convince you that sovereignty is rebellion against divine order. This is why Saturn's mythology is so dark. Cronus devours his own children not only to prevent being overthrown, but to invert the natural flow of life. Fathers are meant to nurture, Cronus consumes. Time is meant to be fluid, Saturn crystallizes it. Laws are meant to protect, Saturn weaponizes them. In the Matrix, the very instincts that could free you and Garrett injustice, hunger for knowledge, refusal to bow, are rebranded as flaws. And the traits that enslave you, obedience, self-denial, fear, are rebranded as virtues. This inversion is the master spell. Imagine a mirror hung in a dark room. When you gaze into it, your reflection appears reversed. Left becomes right, right becomes left. The Archons have built such a mirror for the soul. They show you your shadow and call it sin. They show you your essence and call it dangerous. They show you your chains and call them wings. And because you have been conditioned since birth to trust the mirror, you accept the inversion as reality. You repress your shadow instead of integrating it. You sacrifice your vitality instead of wielding it. Fear your own power instead of refining it. This is how the Matrix maintains itself, not by brute force, but by turning you against yourself. Look at the moral binaries drilled into society. Sex is sinful, but violence is heroic. Submission is holy, but questioning is blasphemy. Poverty is virtuous, but wealth is corruption. Less wealth serves the system. Order is always good, chaos always bad, except when the system deploys chaos to reset control. These are not random contradictions. They are deliberate inversions. They teach you to mistrust your inner compass and look to external authorities for direction. They teach you to equate safety with obedience and to equate danger with freedom. This inversion extends to karma itself. True karmic law, in its pure form, is simply cause and effect, the neutral echo of your own choices. But in the Saturnian trap, karma becomes debt, punishment, endless penance. You are told you must work off lifetimes of mistakes, that you must reincarnate again and again to learn lessons. But what if the lessons are never meant to end? What if the real purpose is to keep you bound? The Archon's greatest triumph is convincing souls that their prison is a school, that their cage is a temple, that their torment is a blessing. And yet, the inverted moral code can be decoded. The same mirror that distorts can also reveal. When you recognize the inversion, you stop reacting automatically. You begin to ask, who benefits from my shame? Who profits from my fear? Who grows stronger when I suppress my anger, my curiosity, my power? The answers lead back to the same nodes. Saturn, the Archons, the system of loops. Awareness turns the mirror transparent. This is why figures like Lucifer were demonized. In myth, he is cast as the rebel, the bringer of forbidden fire, the adversary of God. Yet in older traditions, he was a symbol of illumination, the archetype of knowledge, the refusal to bow to tyranny. His story is the story of the inverted code: knowledge painted as evil, obedience painted as good. The same with Prometheus, punished for bringing fire to mankind. The same with every heretic burned for questioning the sanctioned truth. The system always frames awakening as sin, but once you see the pattern, its power fades. You realize your shadow is not your enemy, but your ally. You realize anger can be transmuted into clarity, desire into creation, ambition into sovereignty. Integration is the antidote to inversion. To look into the dark mirror and not flinch. To reclaim the parts of you labeled dangerous and weave them back into wholeness. The Archons cannot feed on an integrated being. Saturn cannot bind a consciousness that has inverted the inversion. Imagine standing in a ritual circle. The air hums with Saturn's frequency. Images of fear rise from your own mind. Faces of demons, memories of shame, whispers of unworthiness. This is the test. Will you recoil and reinforce the programming? Or will you stand, breathe, and recognize these as your own unclaimed powers wearing masks? In that moment, the inversion cracks. The demon's face dissolves. The shame lifts. The power flows back to you. This is the path the system fears most. Not rebellion and rage, but rebellion and remembrance. Not war against shadows, but ownership of them. A being who has reclaimed lust, rage, curiosity, and sovereignty cannot be manipulated by guilt. They cannot be controlled by false virtue. They cannot be bribed with promises of future salvation. Stand outside the code, unbound by the inversion. The inverted moral code is the keystone of the Saturnian matrix. Remove it, and the rest collapses. Contracts lose their force, the rituals lose their charge, the symbols lose their spell. Because all of it rests on your belief that obedience is good and power is evil. Change that belief, and the architecture dissolves. The Archons starve not because you fight them, but because you stop feeding them. This is the quiet revolution. Not overthrow, but overturning the mirror. Seeing through the trick and choosing differently. In a world where everything has been inverted, remembering your true orientation is the ultimate act of defiance. And once you remember, the false morality cannot hold you. You were told that ritual belongs only to temples, to hidden cults, to strange magicians drawing circles by candlelight. But look closer. Ritual is everywhere, woven so deeply into daily life that you no longer notice its presence. The Saturnian system does not need secret ceremonies in the night when it has millions. Unconsciously performing its rites each morning. The alarm clock that drags you from sleep is a bell no different from a church chime, a signal that time Saturn's domain has claimed another fragment of your life. The commute is a procession. The office cubicle is a cell. The weekly meeting is a liturgy. You rise, obey, repeat. That is ritual. Schools condition children with bells, schedules, uniforms, and pledges. Every hand placed over a heart, every recited oath, every synchronized gesture is ceremonial. They call it tradition, but its structure is no different from a mass in a cathedral or a procession around a black cube. Stadiums fill with bodies chanting the same words, waving the same sigils called flags, pulsing with orchestrated emotion. That is ritual. Courts demand silence when the judge in black robes enters a priestly figure presiding over the altar of law. That, too, is ritual. Advertising is ritualized magic. Logos function as sigils, repeated endlessly until they carve pathways in the subconscious. Commercial jingles are chants, mantras of consumption. Holiday sales are festivals where offerings are made not to gods, but to corporations. Every ritual of Saturn is transactional energy, given upward, awareness drained downward. You think you are shopping, celebrating, obeying law? Obeying law? In truth, you are repeating incantations that strengthen the grid. Consider the architecture of cities. Skyscrapers rising like obelisks, squares and cubes dominating skylines, corporate towers arranged around plazas like temples. These are not neutral designs. They're modern sanctuaries of Saturn, built to channel collective energy. Even the simple act of clocking in and out, the punch of time on a card, is a miniature blood sacrifice of ours, sealed by ritual repetition. Every act of obedience is ritual. Every unexamined habit is prayer. Every slogan on your lips is invocation. Still, the illusion is maintained. Ritual belongs to the primitive, the occult, the irrational. Yet the truth is inverted. The so-called rational world is saturated with ritual, while true ritual, the kind that liberates, has been demonized. This is the masterstroke of Saturnian control. You were taught to laugh at magicians while living as the most ritualized generation in history. The Gaudia taught magicians that ritual, when conscious, is technology. Every candle, every seal, every incantation was designed to align consciousness, to open channels, to make the unseen respond. Saturn's system uses the same mechanisms, but strips them of awareness. Ritual becomes unconscious. You repeat motions without meaning, words without intention, cycles without questioning. And in that unconsciousness, the prison sustains itself. But ritual can be inverted back. The same mechanics that enslave can free when reclaimed. Light a candle with intention, and you activate archetypes within. Speak words with awareness, and they vibrate differently, shifting the field. Create symbols consciously, and you reprogram your reality. Ritual is never neutral, it is always shaping. The difference lies in consent. Do you perform it unconsciously for the system, or consciously for yourself? Imagine walking through daily life as though every gesture were sacred. You see the flag and refuse to bow. You hear the anthem and stand in silence instead of chant. You break the cycle of consumption by refusing the corporate festival. These are rituals, true rituals of refusal, rituals of awakening. Each act becomes a spell that weakens the grid. Each choice becomes a declaration that your awareness cannot be harvested. This is why awakening spreads like contagion. One person refusing to obey disrupts the rhythm. Rituals depend on harmony, on synchronized participation. When even a few step out, the collective energy falters. The Saturnian system thrives on repetition. Break the rhythm, and cracks appear in the wall. The irony is that the system has always feared ritual. That is why it demonizes witches, magicians, sorcerers. It's not because they performed rituals, but because they chose their own. They dared to step outside the sanctioned liturgies of Saturn and into ceremonies of sovereignty. They inverted the inversions. They made ritual theirs again. Ritual is everywhere. The question is not whether you practice it, but whether you are aware of it. Each habit, each cycle, each repetition is a ritual act. Once you see it, you can choose. Continue feeding the machine, or turn ritual into the weapon of your awakening. The moment you choose consciously, the prison shakes. And when enough people do, the entire system begins to collapse, not through war, but through the slow death of unconscious ritual. Awakening is not a gentle dawn, it is rupture. It is the shattering of glass walls you never knew were there. The sudden recognition that the prison has no locks, only illusions. For as long as you can remember, you believed time was natural, that debt was inevitable, that ritual was tradition, that morality was fixed. But the moment you see Saturn's architecture for what it is, the false light begins to flicker. You realize the hum in your bones was never silence but a broadcast. You realize the contracts you thought divine were forged in deception. You realize the cube you worshipped as sacred was a cage. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. The first taste of awakening is vertigo. The world does not vanish, but it warps. You walk through your city and see not buildings, but monuments to limitation. You enter a courtroom and see not justice, but Saturn's priest in black robes. You watch a graduation and see not triumph, but initiation into servitude, square caps crowning heads in allegiance to the cube. Every ritual, every symbol, every cycle, once invisible, now burns with clarity. The veil is thin, and behind it the Archons hiss, because they know. Once awareness cracks the spell, obedience falters. System does not collapse. Dramatically, it collapses in your refusal. When you withdraw consent, the loop weakens. When you refuse to sign the contract, karma's chains loosen. When you deny the false light, the tunnel fades. cannot hold you without your agreement. An agreement is always stolen through ignorance. Awakening is the theft reversed. Reclaim what was always yours. Sovereignty. But awakening is not comfort. It demands sacrifice. You must bleed not to the system, but to yourself. The sacrifice of illusions. The sacrifice of obedience. The sacrifice of false virtue. Each layer burned away reveals something raw, something terrible, something luminous. Your shadow rises to meet you. All the rage, lust, ambition, and rebellion you were told to fear stand before you, not as demons to fight, but as fragments to reclaim. To awaken is to integrate, to become whole again, beyond binaries, beyond the inverted moral code. Imagine the moment of death. You step out of your body and see the tunnel of light. You hear familiar voices, feel the pull of warmth. For centuries, souls have entered without question. But the awakened one pauses. They see the glow for what it is bait. They hear the voices for what they are, coercive memory recycled to manipulate. And in that pause, in that refusal, the trap dissolves. The tunnel collapses. The Archons recoil. For the first time, the soul is not bound to return. For the first time, the wheel of Saturn shudders. This is awakening, not escape from life, but mastery of choice. You still walk the world, but you are no longer of it. The bells ring, the rituals continue, the contracts appear, but you no longer consent blindly. You choose. And that choice radiates. The system feeds on conformity, but one sovereign being weakens it more than 1,000 compliant sleepers sustain it. Because sovereignty is contagious. To witness it is to feel the mirror crack inside yourself. The Archons fear this, above all. Not violence, not rebellion with swords, but remembrance. Because remembrance starves them. Remembrance cuts their harvest. Remembrance breaks the loop. When you remember you were never debtor, never sinner, never slave, the entire structure loses authority. Saturn's hum becomes background noise. The cube shrinks to geometry. The contracts burn to ash. The rituals crumble without consent. The most forbidden knowledge is simple. You were never powerless. You were persuaded to forget. The prison was built of symbols, contracts, and inversions, all fragile, all dissolvable by awareness. And awareness is yours. No ritual is stronger than the choice to see. No contract is stronger than the refusal to sign. No cycle is stronger than the decision to step aside. Awakening does not mean leaving the world. It means walking it, as ritual incarnate, as sovereign seal, as the unbound. Every breath becomes spell. Every word becomes command. Every step becomes declaration. I will not bleed for the system. I will not sign its contracts. I will not obey its inversion. I will remember, and in that remembrance, the rings of Saturn tremble. This is the final terror for the architects of the Matrix, that enough souls will awaken, enough will refuse, enough will remember. Because then the prison is not destroyed, it is abandoned. And a prison without prisoners is nothing at all. The rings still hum, the cube still stands, and the trap still waits. Yet once you have seen the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Another veil calls to be torn. Will you remember or repeat? Comment your thoughts, subscribe, and step deeper into the forbidden.